the first part on Carl Jung. We completed the first 15 questions of the chapter. In this second part, we'll complete this chapter on Carl Jung. In the second part, we will finish the chapter on Carl Jung, question 16 to question 30. Question 16, what is the concept of the stroke of the noon? The stroke of the noon is a very popular and significant phrase used by Carl Jung, conceived also by him. Jung looks at the program of life as being divided in two parts. It's like the sun rising, reaches to the peak and starts the descent. So the first half is the first 35 years of life, and the descent phase, the ascent phase is 35 years, and the descent phase is 35 to 70, 75. The stroke of the noon is the midpoint where the ascent stops and the descent begins. The first half of the life is driven by senses, by search for pleasure, essentially sense pleasure, by quest of power, the quest of wealth, the quest for partners. And the second half of the life is more given to culture, to spirituality, to creativity, to giving back to society, to service. And the two are complementary. Jung calls, therefore, the age of 35 as the stroke of noon. And the values which governed life in the first part of ascent are very different from the values of the second part. The first innings and the second innings are two different innings. In a more functional sense, in a more optimal sense, Jung essentially is talking about midlife in a slightly different way. He's talking of midlife in a very positive way, in a very positive and energetic way. Usually the midlife is around 42, where the crisis happens, often leading to depression, often leading to divorce, often leading to a loss of the job. That is where a reassessment, revaluation of our entire life happens. And that also is a point of mourning, because many goals with which we started off are not met. In a way, Jung prepones midlife and converts it into a midlife opportunity rather than a midlife crisis. Almost like you are preparing for 42 at 35. If the first half has been well lived, one can easily make a healthy transition to the second half. Unfortunately, for most of us, we have not been able to live the first half completely, and therefore the transition always is problematic. There is too much of mourning to be done, and therefore mourning does not become possible. That leads to frustration, anger, depression. In the second half of life, mortality becomes a fact. It's no longer a concept which is true for others and not true for ourselves. The defense of denial and reaction formation, which we use to deal with our own mortality lose their power, and mortality comes in our face like a fact. The sand is dripping out of the sand glass. There is only a limited amount of time left with us. There is also a load of frustrations and a clear understanding of our own limitations and incapabilities and weaknesses. With that load, how one is able to work through one's burden of the frustrations of life determines how you are dealing with the stroke of the noon. If you don't respect the stroke of the noon at 35, then you are forced to learn it the hard way at 42. It is said, if you don't learn to live with reality, reality will come and start living with you. So if you don't understand the stroke of the noon at 35, the stroke of the noon will strike at 42 much harder, often with a pathology. So the concept of stroke of noon is very important in the Jungian realm. And also it is important for everyone else. It's a universal concept that just as you have a pre-puberty, in puberty, you have an end of puberty. So midlife crisis 42, the menopause is the end of puberty. What starts at puberty ends there. And just as you have pre-puberty, you have a pre-end of puberty. And the stroke of the noon is like a pre-midlife. In a healthy system, in a successful system, it is a midlife. But if you don't accept the midlife as a midlife, and if there is too much of pre-midlife still active and cannot be silenced, cannot be deactivated even partially, then you have to wait for the stroke of the noon at 42. And that's a much harder stroke of the noon. In fact, it is the stroke of the evening, so to say. 17. What are the personality types? One of Jung's important contributions has been development of personality types. So Jung divides human population first into two groups, introverted and extroverted. And each of these two groups are further divided into four, and therefore the entire population gets divided into 8 groups. The 4 types that he divides each of the two is the sensing, the feeling, the thinking, and the intuitive type. Obviously, all of us have all these elements in us based upon what is strongest is how we label the personalities. So you can be an intuitive person, you can be a introverted with intuition as the main function, or you can be a extroverted with intuition as the main function. So you have introverted, extroverted, and then in each 4 categories: sensing, feeling, thinking, intuition. Sensing, feeling, thinking, intuition. So you can be extroverted and intuitive, or introverted and intuitive, extroverted and thinking, introverted and thinking, and so on. And Jung says, just as we have one of the 4 elements as the predominant factor, there is another factor which is the minor part of it, the minor counterpart of the major. Said he puts up a personality in terms of 4 letters. So first he says, so he will say INFJ, which means I first is introverted or extroverted. So I or E. And the other 3 will be among the 4 that he lists out. That's how he divides the personalities. And based upon this division, many psychological tests have come up. MBTI is one such test. This personality type can be used very effectively in therapy because each type responds to certain interventions better than others. The sensing type essentially is driven by what is reported by the senses. The feeling type, he is misusing the word feeling actually. Jung should have used the word evaluating. So what he means by feeling is actually evaluation. So the evaluating type, who are into social evaluation of something, the moral evaluation of something. The thinking type, who are into analytical processing. And the intuitive type, who are into the artistic philosophical mode of thinking. Jung gives a very, Anthony Stevens gives a very good example of this. Anthony Stevens says, imagine a situation, there is a bar and two people come out of the bar fighting, quarreling with each other loudly. And four different people standing outside see the same incident, but they focus on different aspects of the incident and they analyze the incident differently. The processing in the mind is differently done based upon whether they are sensing type, feeling type, thinking type, or intuitive type. He gives a very good example. The sensing type will report the incident like this. Two people were fighting as they came out of the bar. One was taller than the other, 5'10", the other was 5'7". The bigger one was around 85 kg, the smaller one was around 60 kg. The bigger one hit the smaller one and he fell down on the floor. This is the reporting of sensing type based upon what is reported by the senses. The feeling type would say, this does not seem to be a ordinary thing. It's highly immoral. Had these people got some more morality, more sensitivity, this would not have happened. This is not something which can be accepted easily. The bar owners should do something to prevent something of this sort. If not anything, law should be created to govern these places better. It goes into evaluation, a social evaluation of what has happened, the right and wrong of it, how to set it right. He also talks about this may not be a place to come with the family if one has to come to some bar. This is not the place to come. This is not a family type of situation. This is the feeling type. The thinking type goes into the analysis of it. If policies were made, if bars were made to obey certain laws, if there were police inside of it, or if people were incentivized to pull apart quarreling people, this would have been stamped at its birth. So the thinking person goes into the analysis of the incident, a very rational analysis based upon the cost-benefit kind of platform. The intuitive type goes into the philosophical thinking. What else can happen unless the lower part of the society is given good education, unless a socialistic turn is taken by the policymakers? First, we create helpless, frustrated, uneducated people, and then we complain about them fighting in the club. What else can happen if not this? Nothing can change in the world unless we change the education and the capitalist orientation of this one. So he goes into philosophizing. The same incident, the stimulus is the same, but which part of the stimulus is emphasized upon and how it is processed, that is different in all the four people. So the stimulus is different, but processing is very different. It's like two people eat 1 kg of mango every day. They don't grow at the same height and weight. The processing system processes the input differently. So it brings out the significance of the processing system, not a blind slavery of the stimulus. So this is as away from the behavioral paradigm as it can be. Was Jung influenced by Indian psychology and philosophy? He was greatly interested. He tried to learn, but he could not learn it completely. Often he got it wrong. He was deeply interested. He tried to integrate, but it was too away from him, for him, and too difficult because it is too deep. Indian psychology and philosophy is integrated inseparably from Indian spirituality. Unlike in the West, where psychology, spirituality, philosophy, and theology are four different areas, in India, the four are together. And therefore, unless one makes a very deep study, one can't get a hang of it. And unfortunately, despite the best efforts and sincerest of interest, you could not grasp very deep schools of Indian spirituality or psychology. So there are very deep schools of yoga, tantra, Shri Vidya, and all these schools have their own road of experiences, their own techniques of self-exploration and self-transformation. So was he influenced? Partly, I would not say influenced, he was interested, but he could not really grasp, he could not really understand the complicated and very deep and experiential schools of Indian psychology and philosophy and spirituality, but interested definitely he was. What is the search of the sacred? It is a phrase by Jung where he said, instead of search of the sexual pleasure, it is the search of the sacred which is more fundamental and central to human existence. And Freud just went on the wrong way. He tried to search for the sacred in the sexual. However, the real problem of modern man is the lack of cultural rootedness, lack of connection to nature, and lack of the sacred in his life. It is not the lack of pleasure, it is the lack of the sacred. And this search of the sacred became very central to Jung in his conceptualization of program of life. 20. What is the red book and the blue book? Jung wrote extensively in books and journals. However, he also wrote some of his explorations in his two diaries, which are called as the red book and the blue book. These are journals, and they create a wealth of insights and even greater wealth of data. The scope ranges from observations, comments, personal experiences, attempt at understanding the occult. The red book especially goes through his journey of psychosis. It's an invaluable entry into the mind of a psychotic. This was Jung's period of suffering, of deep inward travel, of personal suffering. He called it Nekia, very similar to Freud's 7 years of splendid isolation. Both of them came out of this difficult period and went on to become founders of great schools. Freud developed the Freudian school, Jung developed the Jungian school. In that sense, the suffering was well rewarded for. Initially, one of the two books was published, but now both the books are available. Red book and blue book, both are available. What is the program of life? Jung felt that there is a generic program of life which we all have to live, all human beings. It is species generic. All of us have to be born. We have to pass through being infants, then being children, then teenage, young age, holding a family, becoming more like an advisor consultant, old wise men, and then we die. And this is a biological program of life. On it, a layer of social program of life can also be put. But essentially, in some form or the other, we are living out this biological program of life. And this program is generic to our species. There is no uniqueness of individual on this. We don't see any individual who directly goes from childhood to the old age without passing through the phase of youth or middle age. We don't see anybody who is directly born young. Everyone has to pass through the infantile process. So this is a biological program of life, and our psychological program of life also is rooted in many ways in this biological program of life. So there is a program of life which has a biological layer, a psychological layer, and a social layer. All the three are there, constitute together a very specific, very unique program of life for the individual. So generically it is all the same, but the specifics of that are different from individual to individual. In structural terms, this program of life happens inside the mind when the self regulates the collective unconscious by activation and deactivation of suitable archetypes suitable to an appropriate stage in the program of life. 22. What was Jung's approach to old age? Jung felt old age was also a rich and important part of life, not just a necessary evil. It is not a part of life where all one has to do is to suffer sickness and wait with anxiety for death. But it is purposeful like any other stage of life, and therefore it has survived the evolutionary selection. It is a time for reflecting back and assimilating experience and the essence of experience. It is also a time to give back the wisdom of life to the new generation. It is also a time to give skills to the new generation. It is also a time for spiritual progress and preparing for a next birth. So the old age in a way provides a very happy and wise closure to life. Life may have begun with ignorance and turbulence, but you get a closure to that with wisdom and contentment. So the last archetype to be lived out is that of the old wise man, and he himself became the old wise man of Krishna. 23. What are the healing images? It's very important because this is a concept many other schools of psychoanalysis miss out. Jung discovered that as healing happens in therapy, you start getting images and visuals much before it is told to you in words, and much before you are able to express it through your conscious mind to somebody or to yourself. And these visuals often come up in dreams. And they tell us that something is going right. So much before the person consciously comes to know about it, there already is an appreciation of that fact that healing is happening, something right is happening in therapy, and these healing images come up. So in one sense, the healing images are communication that something right is happening. At the same time, they can also be the images because of which healing happens. So there are two interpretations to this term healing images. One, images which come and enable healing, and two, images which communicate that healing is on the way. The second part is easy, that images come first, words come later. And if you interpret the images in that sense, you can find out healing images in day fantasies and night dreams. One part. More complicated is when healing happens in images. That images come which enable integration, which enable catharsis, which enable the unconscious getting conscious, which enable strengthening of the ego self-axis, which enable activation and deactivation of the right archetypes according to the program of life and the stage of life. These healing images are often worshipped in the East in the occult form of any spiritual school. Every spiritual school in the East has a occult component to the school. And you see many healing images, a lot of them in the Tibetan tradition, Indian tantric tradition, being worshipped. These are images which enable healing. So these are the healing images, images that heal, images that communicate that healing is happening. 24. What is the significance of mandalas? Mandala are geometrical figures used in the East. The more generic term is the yantra, any visual form which is used. The visual form may be drawn on paper. It can be put into a sculpture or created out of any material, metal, wood, stone, mud, or any form of any particular part of the human body can be treated like a yantra. So yantras are visual elements or tools. Not only that, yantra essentially are tools, mostly visual, which are used in tantra. So you have the mantra, yantra, and the tantra. Yantra are usually visual entities, and some particular forms of yantras are the mandalas, in which Jung got interested. And Jung started looking at these geometrical figures from a psychotherapy standpoint. Interesting part was these geometrical forms often appeared spontaneously to people. That I can also vouch for. As a child, I used to draw many figures spontaneously, which later on I realized were certain forms of yantras of some particular deities. Must be because of my past life practice. But this geometric shapes, they occur in every culture spontaneously. And some of these are very useful for healing and for communicating the condition of the unconscious. So Jung went into this mandalas, and there are many things which can be said. One is the movement from non-circular to circular mandalas, which is the circular mandala becomes a symbol of wholeness. And individuation then is symbolized as movement depicted in the geometric form from a non-circular, non-spherical to the circular or the spherical. And the mandalas, they depict either the condition of the unconscious or the difficulties of the unconscious or the road to healing or a movement to wholeness. Different mandalas depict different things. And the principle of compensation, balanced development, healing and individuation are all seen in these mandalas. And these geometric outpourings, spontaneous outpourings, are very important to understand the unconscious mind and the movement of the psyche in the person. In the East, there are many schools, and based upon the path chosen, deities are worshipped, and each deity has its own mandala, own yantra. 25. What is synchronicity? Jung believed that what seems empirically disconnected and yet intuitively seems connected is actually connected, and that is where the synchronicity is at work. That we realize that intuitively we feel something is connected, but empirically no connection seems visible. And therefore, they seem like a coincidence. However, Jung says there are no meaningless coincidences. There is a deeper relation of meaning. And some relation which can be causal, maybe not causal, but some relation which we are not able to understand. So Jung defines synchronicity as temporally coincident occurrences of casual events. They are casual to a empirical eye, but not casual to a holistic eye. At a deeper level of reality, there is some connection and some meaning of what seems otherwise to be just a meaningless coincidence. Jung had very deep discussions with Einstein, Wolfgang Pauli, to see if there was a deeper connection and if the collective unconscious could be put together into a wider theory of everything. So the theory of everything that's physics tries to create, and the theory of everything that psychoanalysis tries to create, can we put the two together and create a grand theory of everything? So he was deeply in conversation, but they tried conceptualization also, especially Pauli and Wolfgang Pauli and Jung, in terms of monads, but they could not really go far on that front. Some synchronous events we can take as examples. You feel something will happen and it happens. And we are not talking of ordinarily predictable events here. Two things happen at the same time. You think about somebody and somebody starts thinking about you. You get into some situation and you feel this has happened before. You meet a person and you feel you have met before. These are some of the examples of synchronicity, not explainable by empirical science, but intuitively we feel there is some connection at a deeper level. And someday we will discover that grand theory of everything, which will explain what we intuitively feel today. In which countries Jungian therapy is popular? Quite popular, not quite popular today, but I would say, relatively speaking, popular in Europe and USA, especially in Switzerland, USA, quite some followers in Germany, some in UK, in India very few, but it's building up in India. How was Jung's personal life? Did he have affairs with patients? Yes, he was happily married with wife and kids, but he always had affairs with many of his patients. In a way, he was a, a serial philanderer and a serial patient sleeper. Slept around with many of his patients. Two became very popular, Tony Wolff and Sabrina Spielberg. Some popular films have been made on these two affairs. By today's standards, he would have lost his license. He would be in jail probably. But he was lucky at that time he got away with it. Got away with what I would call the intimate matters of intricate nature. In that sense, Freud was far more ethical of not sleeping around with patients compared to Jung. 28. Did Jung become psychotic in some phase of his life? What is his take? Yeah. Yes, after the break with Freud, Jung went through a psychotic phase for quite some years. This phase he calls as Dekya. It was a phase of psychosis and disorientation. In his words, the encounter with his own number two and his own collective unconscious. Freud underwent a similar phase of 7 years, which he calls splendid isolation. But there's one difference. Freud's splendid isolation was essentially a neurotic journey. Jung's Dekya was a psychotic journey, and therefore the two are very different. Splendid isolation was neurotic, Dekya was psychotic. Like all great thinkers and mystics who undergo this kind of difficult phases and come out of it with great amount of clarity, energy, healing, and a purpose of life and a mission to fulfill, both Freud and Jung also came out of it the same way. In that sense, Jung's Dekya ended up into something very productive, creative, and gave him a mission, a purpose, and a sense of fulfillment in life. 29. What are the good resources to know more on Jung? Jung is not an easy person to read directly. He was not a good writer, could not write in a structured way or easy to understand way. It's more of an writing of an artist rather than the logically rigorous writer. One good way to start with would be with books of Anthony Stevens, and then go to some websites and go into the basics, then take up Jung in original, and then take up the Cambridge Companion on Jung. And then you can go to other books, of course, the contemporary books. Last would be the research papers on Jung. How is Jung seen today? Many of Jung's ideas have not found empirical support. Some of them have found it. Many of them have not found it. Jungian therapy is no longer the most popular form of therapy. Inside psychoanalysis, most of them see Jungian approach more as creative, artistic, or literary rather than strictly a clinical psychology approach. The Jungian school is not seen as a school of science, rather it is seen as a school of arts. However, his personality types is very much in use. His technique of active imagination, many people use it, even outside of the Jungian circles. His program of life, his concept of individuation, integration of yin and yang, the ego-self axis, these are lasting concepts that have forever enriched psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. And despite not being the flavor of the day or not being in the top 10, it still continues to be among the top 25 psychotherapy approaches in the world. And my feeling is if it is developed well in an end approach with other schools, and then rigor is brought about in the Jungian school, it can enlarge and enrich itself, especially not only by integrating other schools of psychoanalysis, but also integrating other schools of Western psychotherapy, and more importantly, schools of Eastern spirituality. Enrichment of these flavors, I believe, can happen over the next decade if Jungians can be open and deep enough to assimilate and integrate these ideas. One famous quotation from Jung, he used to say, show me a sane man and I will cure him for you. We complete the chapter of Carl Jung today. In the next session, we will start with the chapter on Melanic line. Thank you.